Hello and welcome to the BCRC show, the show that advocates that BC resources should make BC jobs. My name is Clint Chappell and we are live downtown in Hub Space in Prince George right now. Very excited about today's guest. Before we get started, I just want to thank all the frontline and essential workers who are currently keeping us safe from the COVID-19 virus. You guys are doing amazing stuff. Keep up the great work. My guest here today is the president of the Independent Contractors Building Association, Chris Gardner. How's it doing? How are you doing today, Chris?
Good evening, Clint. It is a real pleasure to be on the show with you this evening. I'd like to echo your encouragement for the frontline workers. I don't think any of us could have imagined just how dramatically and how quickly our life has changed. 100 days ago, everything was normal, and the lives of everyone on the planet has been dramatically impacted, both personally, professionally, our economy, everything we do socially. So the work that our frontline workers are doing is greatly appreciated.
I honestly, that's such a great thing you just said, because that is so much the truth right there, and they're keeping us safe, and we got to do our part as a society to make sure that we're all making sure that this virus doesn't spread. So thanks to everybody. So let's just get started here, Chris, if you don't mind. For people who are unfamiliar with the 40+ year history of the ICBA, which is now how I'm going to say it so I don't screw up the name too much of the ICBA, can you kind of explain what your organization is about?
Sure. We're in our 45th year. We represent, we're the voice, a leading voice of construction in British Columbia. This morning, about 250,000 men and women woke up, went to a job site in this province to help build our economy. And the work that they do contributes about 10% of the output of our province. So it's vitally important. Construction workers work in every community of the province. And their work is important for creating jobs and opportunity and creating a competitive economy because of the infrastructure that they build. At ICBA, we train 4,000 professionals a year, so we have a big workforce development division. We provide group health and retirement benefits. We're one of the largest providers of health and dental plans in terms of the independent providers in this province, and it's rapidly growing. And we do public policy research, and that research is focused on strong and dynamic construction sector, but also creating the opportunities from a tax and regulatory perspective that will attract investment, generate opportunities, and create jobs that will ensure that we all prosper and that prosperity is a shared one for everyone in the province going forward.
So obviously we touched on the COVID-19 virus. With COVID-19, the construction that has been with construction companies and construction sites that have been designated essential. How has the ICBA played throughout the pandemic as far as, advocating for certain projects to stay going?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. As I said at the outset, 100 days ago, life was normal, and people were looking forward to making plans for the spring, and then all of a sudden, we're all living in a very new, harsh, and unforgiving reality. The job losses in British Columbia and across Canada have been tragic. We had Jock Finlayson on, the chief economist with the Business Council of Canada, for a town hall, and in simple terms, he just said the economy is being crushed. We haven't seen a crisis from a health or economic perspective at this level for at least 100 years. And so you put that in perspective, the job losses, the impact for communities, families across the province has been fairly dramatic. So what we did at ICBA is first, we wanted to make sure that construction stayed open. And in the initial days of the shutdown, there was a lot of confusion. Are construction sites going to be open? Are they going to be shut down with other parts of our economy? So we worked very quickly with a number of other business associations to say, listen, 250,000 men and women support their families by going to a job site. This is an essential service. We need to continue to build schools, hospitals, roads, bridges. And fortunately, the government agreed and declared through the Dr. Bonnie Henry, declared construction an essential service. And so the construction sector responded, adopted new health and safety protocols, And so we saw crew levels across the province probably dip to 75% of their pre-COVID levels. Now I would say they're back up nearly at the levels they were before the shutdown and the pandemic. But construction contractors and employees responded. And so as we're speaking today, WorkSafe BC has only recorded only one instance of a construction worker contracting COVID-19 on a job site. So it's a remarkable record of safety. And so hats off to the men and women in construction who go to a job site every day. They answered the call, they stepped up. And in a lot of ways, construction workers are leading the path and showing the way for other industries in terms of how you can operate safely. You're operating differently, but you can still operate and you can still be safe. And construction's done that in spades. So we're pleased with where we are as a sector, because there's a lot of other sectors, hospitality, retail, restaurants, that have not fared as well. And the job losses and the dislocation has been very tragic.
No, I can honestly say with our company, as soon as the COVID-19 hit, obviously that first week was kind of, feeling it out and trying to figure out what exactly was going on. But, I think what you just hit on there and the way you just answered that question is very true. I mean, as soon as it hit, there was, a 1 week span of people trying to figure out what's going on. And then it was the policies that came in, individual companies, not just the corporate companies. Like my company itself, Miltron, we implemented our own set of procedures, and I'm sure all the other companies did as well, because you want to be safe, you want people to feel comfortable. I think all that stuff's important, and we need to make sure that we recognize that the construction companies and the facilities really did a very good job of making their own protocols, while also following the great Dr. Bonnie Henry, who's just skyrocketed. If you could buy the stock before COVID-19, that would have been the stock to buy, is the stock in Bonnie Henry. So she's been phenomenal. Right. She's been absolutely phenomenal.
Well, and you raise a good point, because it wasn't like Dr. Henry put out a 3-page document for construction contractors to follow. She basically put out 8 guidelines, 8 bullet points that said, here are the principles, here's the framework. Now take this and develop a policy that's going to work for your company, for your job sites, for your offices. And that's what construction did. And whether you were a large general contractor, a smaller subcontractor, everybody took up that challenge and put in policies and procedures that, as a result of all of that, of the 250,000 men and women working in construction, only one has contracted COVID-19 on a job site. Tremendous effort by the men and women in construction, and it really speaks to the leadership that construction. We like to say at ICBA, construction's a little bit of the unsung hero of BC's economy. A lot of other sectors get more profile. The clean energy sector, the film industry, often you see them in the news. And construction often doesn't get that same profile, but it's 10% of our economy. It touches every community, and the work that people do, they have a lot to be proud of. And we all owe everyone a great debt of gratitude for the quality of projects they build in British Columbia.
So we're going to take a quick second here. I just want to, plug all our social media accounts, guys. If you're not following us on Instagram, please follow us on Instagram at the BCRC. Follow us on Twitter at BC_resources. Follow us on LinkedIn. Just type in BC Resources Coalition. You'll follow us there. Get us up on YouTube. Let's get our own YouTube channel going here. I know we're a couple people away from getting that subscribed to get that done. So yeah, just make sure you guys follow us wherever we're going, because the more stuff that you guys share, the more people that take notice, the louder the voice of the BCRC is, and creating BC resources to make BC jobs is very important. In February, Chris, the ICBA released the annual wage and benefits survey prior to COVID coming out. What were some of the challenges and opportunities that you've seen coming up for the industry?
Yeah, well, pre-COVID, I would say now where we are as a sector is that 2019 is probably the high watermark for construction activity in the province. Obviously, this year is going to be a step down in terms of construction activity for obvious reasons. We think 2021 is now going to be a further step down, because business confidence has been shaken so much, and consumer confidence, that we think that RFPs coming out from the private sector and consumers buying product like, for example, new homes and condominiums will slow down. So before COVID, the survey that you represented, it demonstrated over the last 5 years that the biggest challenge facing construction contractors in British Columbia was finding enough workers. And construction has been very busy for the last 5 years. And as a result, the average trade wage rate in construction has been going up year over year between 4 and 5% for the last 5 years. There was a shortage of workers. Wage rates were going up. Tremendous opportunities for young people looking at making career choices in construction. And one of the untold stories of construction is the entrepreneurial opportunity.
Oh yeah.
That presents itself when you learn a trade and a skill, get some experience, and then start your own company. And that is the story of construction companies across this province, where you've got young men and women who start off. It could be an electrical contracting company, a plumbing contract, a carpentry company, and it's tremendous to see how they build these companies. Sometimes they are thriving companies and they employ 10 or 15 people. Sometimes they grow much larger, and it's exciting. So construction does present a lot of opportunities for young people. Our surveys are showing that year after year. Going forward, there's going to be some interesting issues to see how our economy starts to shape out. Already we're seeing that when RFPs come out, there are more subcontractors bidding for that work. And that's because we think there's a little bit of a slowdown that's happening in construction right now. Pre-COVID, it was hard for us to find one of our members that didn't have an 8 to 12 month backlog. They're now running that off. So as RFPs come out for future work, we're seeing increased activity. It's probably going to lead to compression of margins for companies. The labor picture is going to be interesting to see if it's still as tight as it was pre-COVID. We think it might change a little bit. So going into 2021, instead of a 4 to 5% increase in average trade wage rates, we might see something that's flat, closer to being flat. So there's a lot of uncertainty right now. We've performed well as a province, as a jurisdiction coming through COVID-19, probably one of the best in the world. Yeah. For jurisdictions that have a population of about 5 million individuals. But there's still a lot of uncertainty, still a lot of unknown questions. So it's going to be interesting to see how things start to play out.
Yeah, no, I think you hit on a lot of important stuff there. One thing I want to kind of backtrack to is when you're talking about entrepreneurship and trades. I think that's one thing that gets missed quite often with trades is just because it's not a startup company that's doing something tech or you're making whatever. I mean, that you're still being an entrepreneur. So like a young guy like myself, I'm 31 years old. I am very fortunate to have a father that started an electrical company, but that doesn't mean I'm not an entrepreneur. I mean, like everything that I'm doing right now is very entrepreneurial-ish. It's just not in your normal sense, I guess, is what the way people would classify it. Because like you're saying, like I just said, just because you're not in the tech startup company, if you go start a welding truck, you know what, you're an entrepreneur. You're going out there, you're knocking on the doors, you're doing stuff that the big guys don't do right now. And that is very entrepreneurial. So if there is any younger guys watching this, roughly my age or even a little bit older, we're still young guys. Like, get out there, figure out what you want to do, and take your own, it's going to sound corny, but take your own destiny in your own hands and start figuring out your path. So I think that's a very important thing to say. If you guys have any questions for Chris Gardner, the president of the ICBA, please leave them in the comment section. He's here to answer any questions that you guys have. Let's see if we can get some more activity in the comment section, and then let us know if you have any questions for him. Another question here, Chris, is what was the sentiment of the BC business community prior to COVID-19?
Well, one of the, compared to where we are now, everyone looks back at the pre-COVID era with a little bit of rose-colored glasses, because so much of our life was in many ways taken away, whether it was high school graduations, weddings, community events, sports. But pre-COVID, from an economic perspective, there were a lot of storm clouds that were brewing in British Columbia and in Canada. There were significant concerns about the regulatory environment, the taxation levels that were starting to impact our competitiveness. And Canada the view was that Canada was starting to slip and lose its competitive position in the world. So we were not attracting investment at the same levels as we had in the past, and in fact, investment was leaving. And the oil and gas sector is an example of a tragedy of fairly significant proportions that in a lot of ways was self-inflicted. Hundreds of billions of dollars in investment left Canada for other jurisdictions because we've developed a reputation as a jurisdiction that could not get projects to yes. The OECD surveyed 35 countries in terms of length of time it takes to get an infrastructure project approved. Of those 35 companies, Canada ranks 34 out of 35. It's an embarrassing statistic. And it really tells the story. It tells the story of us losing our edge and investors saying, well, if I can't get things done in Canada, I'm going to go somewhere else. I'm going to go to the United States. And we've seen the oil and gas sector in the United States over the last 5 years explode. We've seen other jurisdictions benefit as well, whether it's Australia, Norway, other jurisdictions around the world. And it's tragic because there are few jurisdictions in the world that harness natural resources as sustainably as Canada. And unfortunately, we haven't taken advantage of that opportunity. And so the job losses that we've seen in the oil and gas sector have been enormous. It has been one of the hardest hit sectors of our economy. It accounts for 20% of our exports, but we're letting it wither on the vine. And so we've seen major infrastructure projects like Energy East, that pipeline proposal canceled, Northern Gateway canceled. The Trans Mountain pipeline is going ahead, but wow, that was an awful long time to get that project approved. LNG Canada, again, another $40 billion investment in our economy. Like if you think of it, you've got Site C is roughly a $10 billion investment in our economy, Kinder Morgan about $10 billion, and LNG Canada $40 billion. That's $60 billion. But every single one of those projects was met with fierce opposition. And every single one of them was on the verge of being canceled. And the tragic consequences that would have resulted had those three projects been canceled would have been felt across this province and across this country.
I think people don't realize that when you're talking about all these like the big numbers, the big dollars, people don't realize that money, yeah, they're saying $60 billion. You know, some of that money is going to be spent in downtown locations in Victoria, BC. It's going to be spent in Fort Nelson. It's going to be spent in Cranbrook, McBride, Crest. I could name whatever city you want. All that money is going to be spent in BC. And when you're saying no to these projects, you're hindering people's income, people's jobs, people's well-being. You're not letting that happen. Just because you're against the projects, you really have to look at a broader scope. That if a BC resource is making a BC job, that means the income taxes are different. That means your loans are different. You know, it's so much broader than what people like. The downtown sector here in Prince George, if West Coast Oilfins, when West Coast Oilfins happens here in Prince George is going to be in for such a big economic boom here. And I hope the downtown's ready for it, because it's not just going to be every restaurant's busy. It's going to be, we're going to need more spaces for restaurant. We're going to need more places to go shopping downtown. Like, it's not just as simple as don't let these things happen. Think about the whole scope.
Yeah, well, there's really, when you look at towns that are characterized by increasing investment, a dynamic local economy, opportunities for young people. You've got communities that are growing and expanding. There's a dynamism, there's an excitement about the future. But the reverse of that, when there's no investment, there's no opportunity, there's no jobs, communities start to shrink, people start to leave. Those are two very different worlds, and the latter is not one we want to live in. We want our communities to be thriving, and we want young people to think that they've got a future in Prince George or Fort St. John. And the value chain, to your point, of there's 10,000 businesses in Canada that rely on investment in the oil and gas sector. And there's businesses in Fort St. John right now and in Prince George that are benefiting from the investment in the Coastal GasLink pipeline, for example. And many of our members are working on this project. You've got companies like Solaris Pipeline based in Fort St. John, a local success story, one of Canada's largest independent pipeline contractors that's going to build one section of the Trans Mountain pipeline and two sections of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. Lots of jobs for people in the north. And one of the things, I live in downtown Vancouver, and one of the things that frustrates me is that so many folks in downtown Vancouver don't understand or appreciate the enormous amount of wealth that's generated in British Columbia outside of Vancouver.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
and it is frustrating that that narrative, that story doesn't get more attention in the media and in the business community generally.
It's ridiculous. I mean, I take my family to go shopping downtown Vancouver. That trip alone costs whatever, $2,000 or $3,000. That's $2,000 or $3,000 that came out of the resource industry. That didn't that didn't just come
Right.
out of thin air. That came because I put my hard hat on, I put my boots on, I went to work, I sucked that money out of the resource industry, and I spent it in downtown Vancouver. And for people that are down there that think that their big high rises in Yale Town and their big malls are being built just by the people that live down there, it's ridiculous. It's not. I mean, it's being funded by all these big projects that go
Right.
all over BC. And it really very little of it is coming from Vancouver. It's coming from all over the province. And I think
Right.
people need to, obviously I'm getting a little passionate here because that really bothers me
Yeah.
it's the divide in our province that bothers me between a certain sector of down there
Mhm.
and the rest of the province. I mean, we have to be willing to listen up here too. Like we have to be, we can't just be one way. We have to be willing to listen to the other side too, but we also have to be willing to be heard by the other side. And I
Yeah.
think there has to be some common ground there, and people really have to realize that our money, your money, everybody's money eventually has come from a resource sector. And if they don't realize that, then I don't know. We have to educate more. We have to be talking more. So I got a question here from the comment sections. It's from Dan. How big of an impact do you think the natural resource sector has on the construction sector?
I think it's an enormous impact, and just in the story of the oil sands in Alberta, the job losses have been in the hundreds of thousands. But of those job losses, about 100,000 people in construction have lost their jobs. I just mentioned Solaris Pipeline. There's Macro Industries. When you build a pipeline, there's a lot of construction that goes into that. A lot of, think of all the sub trades that are involved: welders, pipe fitters. You're building substations. There's all the logistics around providing workforce accommodations, all the catering, the companies that provide the rooms for the camps. They design and build camps. Some of the camps are temporary. Some of them are more like a Site C type camp. So there's the value chain is enormous. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs at stake. Right now, the oil and gas sector in Canada employs approximately 500,000 people. You go back to 2016, that was 800,000 people. We've seen 300,000 jobs evaporate. You go back to 2016, there were 450 drill rigs, oil and gas combined, operating in Canada, in Western Canada. Right now, there's 18.
Yeah.
So it is a tragic story of lost opportunity, lost jobs, lost investment, and we all pay that price. And if we don't start to become more competitive in terms of attracting investment, changing our regulatory framework, Bill C-69 and Bill C-48. C-48 was the tanker ban in the northwest part of British Columbia. Bill C-69 was a new regulatory environment for major projects, making it much more difficult. And think of Kinder Morgan, the Trans Mountain Pipeline, 194 conditions to build and operate. 194 conditions. What other jurisdiction on this planet would have imposed 194 conditions? We harness our resources sustainably. We've just got to figure out how to get to yes faster. Because if we don't get to yes faster, those dollars are going elsewhere. And we've seen the story play out. And we've lost billions of dollars in investment. Calgary was on the verge of Canada was on the verge of becoming an energy superpower 10 years ago. We are not on the verge of becoming an energy superpower today. We've lost opportunities.
So what you were saying a couple minutes ago, then I'm going to revert back to some of these questions I wrote down, is you were saying that companies are scared to come to BC right now, like the investment in BC. So you're pretty much saying that the environment that we've kind of created here in BC, more specifically BC, but Canada, is it scaring off investors?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. First of all, new investment in British Columbia is now taxed at the highest rate of anywhere in Canada. We've had 23 increases in taxes and new taxes in British Columbia. So when you start to increase taxes and make the regulatory approval process either more uncertain or more difficult, then investors are saying, well, at some point, it doesn't make sense to allocate our capital either in Canada or British Columbia. We're going to look elsewhere. And that's what a lot of companies have done. If you look at the oil sands, you go back 5 years ago, the oil sands were probably 40% owned by foreign investors, 60% by Canadian. It's now about 80-20, Canadian versus foreign. There's been a flight of foreign capital. The CEO of the Royal Bank of Canada said about a year ago that we had lost $100 billion in investment. So when you lose capital opportunities, you lose investment, you lose people. People go elsewhere. Talent goes elsewhere. So oftentimes you talk about, a $100 million project or $1 billion in investment. What does that mean? That means people. It means you get thought leaders, you get engineers, you get people starting out in their careers, young people looking for opportunity, and you lose all that. And as a result, if you were trying to book a hotel room in Calgary 5 years ago, it was quite, you had to book quite far in advance.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID, so take COVID out of the equation, you could book the day before a hotel in Calgary and you'd have no problem getting in. Yeah. So we've just lost opportunity and our competitive advantage. And it's easy for an elected official to say, oh no, we're going to invest in a green economy, and we are making a transition. No doubt we're going through an energy transition.
Yep.
But what everyone's missed is that transition is taking decades. It's not happening today and tomorrow.
Yeah, there's no magic switch that just all of a sudden we turn off the gas, we turn off the oil. There's no magic switch that does that. This takes decades of planning and procedures and getting it done. Like there is no magic switch. I'm sorry for everyone that wants to believe in that. There just isn't. I'm not saying we shouldn't be investing in that sort of stuff, because we should be, but we have to realize that you still also have to invest in what's got you here. You still also have to maintain in what's gotten Canada, what maintains my heat in my house, your heat in your house, everybody's heat, whatever. You have to maintain that stuff. You can't just walk away from it. You have to build and be ready to walk away from it, but you can't just completely walk away. Anyone that thinks that, they have to reassess some stuff.
Well, there was the city of Vancouver about 2 years ago was deciding that they were going to ban natural gas in the city. And every restaurant owner stood up and said, well, do you realize that if you shut off natural gas or prevent us from using it, the restaurant world is going to look very different for you. And so eventually they backed down, because you get these crazy ideas. The mayor didn't stand up and say, hey, we want to transition off of fossil fuels, and here's our plan to get there over a series of years. It was like, no, we're just gonna end it tomorrow, and that's just short-sighted. It's not responsible leadership, and we need more responsible leadership. We need elected officials to say, hang on. We had the UN Committee on to End Racial Discrimination come out a few months ago and say, now they said you've got to stop Site C, don't go ahead with LNG Canada, don't go ahead with the Kinder Morgan pipeline project. Now this is the UN Committee to End Racial Discrimination. So who are the esteemed members of that committee? We've got countries like Russia, Algeria, China, Turkey. We have nothing to apologize for in terms of our human rights record stacked up against those countries. And so I think we've led ourselves down a path where we've lost opportunities, we've lost investment, and it's hurt our competitiveness. And it's hurting communities like Fort St. John, Prince George, where it's going to become harder to prosper if we don't have the kind of investment in these major projects.
Yeah, and honestly, it's going to affect Vancouver eventually, and Victoria and everywhere else too. It's not just going to be up north. It's going to affect the whole province. I have another question here from the comments from Trudy. How is the ICBA working to increase public support for projects? What successes can you share?
Well, there's a couple of things. When the newly elected NDP government decided that they were going to review the Site C clean energy project, we launched a campaign to basically say to the government and raise public awareness, this is an incredibly important campaign and it's an important project. It's a $10 billion project in clean energy. So you can't have protesters say on the one hand, we don't want to support fossil fuel projects like a new pipeline with the oil sands, and also say, well, we don't want to support Site C, which is clean hydroelectricity. There is no country on the planet that, if they were blessed with the same hydro resources as Canada, would not be developing it to ensure that they've got a clean energy future. We fought hard for that. We launched a pink slip campaign, which basically said there's going to be 2,000 men and women in construction at that time. This was a few years ago, who would lose their jobs if this project did not go forward. So we launched a website. We went to the head office of BC Hydro, and we strung up 2,000 pink slips at a press conference and said, everybody's got to understand that this is an important project. LNG Canada, we support LNG. We've been supporting LNG projects from the beginning. We've done that in Ottawa. We launched a billboard campaign in Ottawa. We had truck rallies in Fort St. John to support LNG. And again, we strongly believe in our investments in these projects. For the Kinder Morgan project, when the BC government said that they were going to go to the BC Court of Appeal to try and prevent the project from going forward, we went to the court and intervened on behalf of the supporters of the project. And as a result of that, the BC Court of Appeal ruled 5-0 that the BC government, their position did not stand up legally. They appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada in 9-0 decision. The Supreme Court of Canada also agreed with our view. So we do a lot of campaigns to raise awareness among the public. We do websites. We have a social media footprint of about 100,000. So if you look at most business associations in the province, they're not particularly engaged on social media. Our view is very different. We've invested a lot of time and resources in building our social media footprint. As a result, it's over 100,000 strong. And we do a lot of public policy research and a lot of advocacy, but our view is you need to talk to average British Columbians. Yeah. It's no good to write a research paper and talk about the economy if you're only going to talk to 500 people in downtown Vancouver.
Yeah, 100%. You got to go talk to everybody.
Yeah, so we strongly believe in engaging local communities, engaging average British Columbians in the way that makes sense, that people can understand, hey, this is about our future. This is about my future, the future of my kids, my family. We need a tax and regulation system that makes sense, that's going to work for everyone. And the problem is, unfortunately, the voices of no, the voices of protest are loud, well organized, well funded, and oftentimes, you've heard the term the silent majority, is silent to the detriment of our future. So we're saying to everyone, perk up, get engaged, get involved, and support these projects.
No, it's true. I mean, everything you just said there is true. Guys, if you have any more questions for Chris, please leave them in the comment section. I got a couple more questions in my hand right now, and before we get to those, I just want to give you a chance here to explain to people how to become a part of the ICBA. What does that process look like?
Yeah, we'll just go to our website, icba.ca. You can contact, you can send an email to me, chris@icba.ca. Our membership fees are extremely low, the lowest of any organization you're ever going to join. Effectively, it's probably going to cost you, for most companies, $400. And some of the larger associations, it's in the thousands of dollars. So it's very reasonable. And there's a whole range of benefits. You alluded to our wage and benefit survey. You'll have access to all of that information, all of our policy research that we do. We do host events around the province, and so you'll have access to that. Discounts on training. We train 4,000 professionals a year. We do specific training that is designed for a company, and we'll go to their site, we'll go to their office and deliver the course. We have a big online training session that's easy to train if you're not living near where a course is being held. And we also do a lot, now in the age of COVID, we're doing a lot of town halls and Zoom calls. I know people are they're getting zoomed out, but we have a very exciting one July the 15th. So that's next week, next Wednesday, with Premier Jason Kenney. And so Jason Kenney's going to kick it off. And we're going to have 3 CEOs. Sean Sveris from Sveris Pipeline in Fort St. John. Trevor Haynes, the CEO of Black Diamond, which is a workforce logistics company, and Tim McMillan, the CEO of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. So Premier Kenney is going to talk about how Alberta's, the leadership he's shown in terms of COVID-19 in Alberta, his plan for recovery, and the oil and gas sector, the challenges we have. That's July 15th. If you go to icba.ca/energy, icba.ca/energy, sign in and you can sign up. You don't have to be a member. It's going to be a great town hall. Excited to hear from Premier Kenney and other leaders in the energy sector.
Well, that's awesome. That's really, really exciting. I'll be tuned into that for sure. Question here from Dan again. How do you think we can bring Canada's competitive advantage back?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, we have to understand that Canada is competing for investment dollars with other countries around the world. And so sometimes in Canada, there's this narrative that, the world, the world wants more Canada, and somehow, we're different than other countries, and we are, of course, we are different. But the reality is that from an investment perspective, investors have choices, and they can invest in the United States and Australia and Norway, other countries around the world, and those countries are attractive as well in lots of different ways. So we are competing for investment dollars. And so when you're competing for investment dollars, what investors want to see is certainty of process, not of the outcome, but don't move the goalposts. If we're going to, talk about investing $10 million or $100 million or more, we want to know what the process is, so what the rules of the game are. And we want certainty that as we get to the finish line, that you don't change the rules of the game, that the goalposts don't move. And that's happened far too often in Canada. So we need a regulatory system that makes sense and that investors can get through in a timely basis. You can't say to an investor, yeah, we won't come and invest in Canada and invest here millions of dollars, but we're going to take 5 years or 10 years to give you an answer. We'll lose opportunities. The second thing we need to do is have a tax system that is reasonable. No one's talking here about giving tax favors to corporations that don't deserve it, but a tax system that doesn't scare away investment, that doesn't say, we're going to tax every single dollar you make out of a project, but it's reasonable. And if you think of it from an oil and gas perspective, the taxes that are paid to municipal, provincial, federal governments, the taxes that workers pay when they're employed, it's billions of dollars to our economy. So let's be reasonable in how we tax investors who want to bring new capital to Canada, because other jurisdictions are doing that. Other jurisdictions are providing better regulatory frameworks with more certainty, more attractive tax regimes, and as a result, they're winning the competition, and we're losing the competition. So those are 2 important things that we focus on a lot at ICBA.
Awesome. I think you kind of already answered this question from Rob just within your last answer, but that's okay. We'll still ask it anyways. Do you think the EAO, the Environmental Assessment Office process, should be quicker for project approval? I think you kind of answered that.
Yeah, well, the answer is yes. I mean, if you want to open up a new mine in British Columbia, it will take you nearly a decade. We just don't respond fast enough. And it doesn't matter. We talk a lot on this. This call we talk a lot about pipelines, and Site C, and those big projects. Listen, you can propose a new townhome or a new townhome project, a new road, a new bridge, and trying to get those projects approved often at the local level. Oftentimes are extremely challenging. There is a housing affordability crisis in many parts of many major centers in British Columbia. And if you look at that, one of the big reasons why is because City Hall, it takes longer to approve and permit a housing project in Vancouver than it does to build it. And as a result, we don't have enough supply, and that's driving up the price of housing. And so it can be, as soon as you propose a new project, the voices of no come out. They go to City Council, they go to Victoria, they go to Ottawa, and they're well organized, they're well funded, and things take too long, and it's too expensive, and we're losing opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. All those organizations are very well funded. And, here at the BCRC, we want to thank all our sponsors because they've kept us well funded too. So thank you guys. We're always looking for new sponsors. So please, if you guys have anything to, if you want to do anything with the BCRC, please just visit our website or contact myself, media at the BCRC.ca, or memberships at the BCRC.ca. And let's try to get some more corporate memberships coming into us so we can continue to advocate that BC resources should make BC jobs. I just want to do a quick shout out here too, Chris, to all the local businesses here in BC, my hometown of Prince George here. Through the COVID, I know you guys all took a not a good turn there, but hopefully everyone's coming back in droves and spending money in the shops. And I think it's very important, if you're watching this, do a skip the dishes if you're not feeling comfortable going out yet. If you're feeling comfortable going out, take the families, go out for dinner. I know it's hard to spend money right now. I felt the crunch too, but we all have to come together as a province right now, as a country, as a nation, as a world, and make sure that all these small local businesses here downtown and in the province are continuing to be able to keep their lights on. Because if we don't put money into them, all of a sudden there isn't going to be any more downtown. So I think that's a pretty important thing to, that's a little bit of a somber way to put it, but I think it's a very important message to get across. So
That's right.
really, Chris, I think we're out of questions here from the audience. So I think we're probably gonna wrap it up here. We're almost 45 minutes into this. So
Okay.
you've been awesome to have on. Do you have any last remarks here, Chris?
Listen, it's been a pleasure. I do believe strongly that so much of the wealth in this province is generated outside of the Lower Mainland. People in the Lower Mainland forget that. We can never forget that. And we've got to do everything we can to be competitive, attract investment, create opportunities, create jobs for people in every community in this province. And part of this discussion will continue with Premier Jason Kenney, July 15th. Go to icba.ca/energy and register. It's free. It's going to be a great discussion about the oil and gas sector and about the challenges we face to create economic opportunities across British Columbia.
Well, before we get going here, guys, I want to make sure everyone knows who the next guest is on the BCRC show. It is the season 4 winner of MasterChef Canada, Trevor Connie. He's going to be on here discussing on, how the resource sector affects restaurant industry, how local farming affects the restaurant industry. We're also going to be recording a podcast with him earlier in that day. So I'm looking really, really forward to that. I'm a bit of a foodie myself. I like to pretend I can cook with all the MasterChef stuff. So we're really looking forward to that. And I just did a podcast here today with the wonderful Dan Ray and all the great blogs that he's writing right now. Those, if you guys haven't checked out those blogs yet, please go to the website, check out the blogs, because they are phenomenal. I can't pump them enough. I think I think Dan's got a real hidden talent. So make sure you guys go check that out. So again, for Chris Gardner, the president of the ICBA, my name is Clint Chappell, and this has been the BCRC show. Have a great night, guys.